Welcome, everyone, once again to the official MUFON Podcast. I am your host, Richard Beckwith. I had the honor and privilege of meeting my next guest at the Devil's Tower UFO Rendezvous 2 years ago. He was the keynote speaker, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the bit players. He has a career in journalism and anomaly research that spans 5 decades. He has presented credible, compelling UFO stories to the public since 1975. In 1978, Lee Speigel became the only person in history to produce a milestone presentation on UFOs at the United Nations. He brought together leading military and scientific experts, including astronomers J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, who urged world leaders to establish an international UFO study committee. Between 1978 and 1986, Speigel produced, wrote, and hosted nearly 1,500 local and national programs on NBC radio dealing with UFOs and unexplained phenomenon. In the middle of his NBC years, while researching Air Force microfilm files at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., he uncovered original audio tapes from a 1965 4-hour encounter experienced by numerous military personnel who watched nearly a dozen luminous UFOs maneuver in the sky above Edwards Air Force Base. Lee was the first person to bring this enigmatic case to the public in a 1982 edition of Omni magazine. In 1993, Speigel wrote and co-produced Lincoln's Music in America, The Classics in Space, a national award-winning classical music special broadcast over the Concert Music Network. This program, co-hosted by SETI founder astronomer Frank Drake, focused on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Between 2010 and 2017, Speigel was the chief Huffington Post writer of hundreds of stories that crossed the fields of the paranormal, UFOs, and science. During that time, in 2012, he was honored with the International UFO Congress Researcher of the Year Award. Speigel was featured on the 2014 Sci-Fi Channel documentary Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Exposed. And in 2015, he was a cast member on Season 2 of the History Channel series Hangar 1, The UFO Files. Lee Speigel is a co-producer and co-writer for The Phenomenon, an upcoming thought-provoking documentary about UFOs, a new installment of filmmaker James Fox's acclaimed UFO films scheduled for an October 6, 2020 worldwide release. He's also the producer of a resurrected version of his previous NBC radio talk show, The Edge of Reality, which originally aired from 1982 to 1986. The new program, Edge of Reality Radio, is broadcast over the KGRA Digital Broadcast Network and distributed by iHeartRadio. Lee Speigel, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here with you, Richard.
Oh, it's really good to have you, Lee. I really appreciate your patience and I appreciate you, spending some time with me today. So we've got a lot of things. You've got a lot of things happening. One of the things we're going to talk about is the phenomenon, which comes up on Tuesday the 6th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. A long time coming. A long time in the works.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the phenomenon? Because we're going to, a little bit later, towards the end of the program, we're going to go ahead and play a trailer
Good.
for the new movie. So, can you tell us a little bit about the phenomenon? What is the phenomenon about?
Well, this I've actually seen the movie now. Easily a couple of dozen times because the last thing that I had to do on the movie as a co-producer and a co-writer, I had to go through every single word by word by word, from narration to voice cuts, in order to make an actual transcript of everything that was said in the movie, so that eventually the movie could be translated into many languages. But they needed a transcription of it. And so I had to keep watching it and watching it. It's a long process to do a transcription of something that's an hour and 40 minutes long. And every time I watched it, Richard, it never got old to me. And I came away from it hoping that when people see this, especially the diehard skeptics and debunkers of UFOs, I'm really hoping that people will come away from this going, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, they got some great stuff on camera. Wow, look at that. We've compiled an incredible array of interviews with high-ranking government officials, military, law enforcement, private citizens, documents that have never been seen before. We have also photographic images that have never been seen before. This movie, and we've put it all together in a sequence, in a timeline that basically some people will say, well, it's probably just UFOs 101. You know what? On some levels it is, but it's a good UFO primer for people who want something credible to really get a firm grip on what's been going on for more than 70 years, and not just in America, but all around the world. And I still get the sense, and I hope people will also, at the end of the movie, you will come away thinking, wow, they've put together some very compelling evidence, a lot of compelling evidence that Earth is being visited by something or someone.
Now, wouldn't you
And
agree? Wouldn't you agree that James Fox has always sort of had that impact? He's been a very serious filmmaker, and he's really
right,
his films, Out of the Blue and I Know What I Saw, also
right.
had a real impact on folks that you might otherwise consider to be just completely skeptical. And I expect that this film will do the same thing, right?
Yes, and even more so because we're going to show, like I said, we're going to be showing things visually and interviews that has never been seen before, and these are people of great integrity. And you have to get to a point, Richard, where even if you're a diehard skeptic and you don't want to believe anything about UFOs, there has to be a place or a point where you must say, okay, it's either total crap or maybe they've got something here. And whatever that thing is that they've got, how do we explain it? How do we move forward to investigate these things? Now, here's another thing. Many people are probably going to look at this die-hard UFO, must be extraterrestrial fans. Well, we're not going in that direction. We're not even trying to say, well, we think that some of these ships are coming from Alpha Centauri and we're being visited by someone from another planet. We're not going there because basically we don't care. I don't care where these things come from. We would like to know what their origin is, but more importantly, we'd like to know what's their agenda. Why are they here? They've been around a very long time. We already know that the Air Force back in 1968 told their Air Force Academy cadets in Colorado Springs that UFOs have been interacting with humans for almost 50,000 years. Like, wow. They were telling the future officers of the Air Force, and we've got this. We've got this kind of information. So, what do we do with this? Who's in control of what's going on around our planet? Although we know, and this will come across in the film, strange objects that are unidentified, unexplained, showing displaying a vastly superior technology to anything that any Air Force on Earth has. We are outmaneuvered by these things. We can't get near them. There was a period of time in the 50s and early 60s when Air Force pilots were ordered to shoot one down, and then that never happened. There's just so much going on. We want you to come away realizing that the thing that you saw last night that might have been following your car, or you might have seen landing in your backyard, not necessarily the planet Venus or the moon, that this is something really serious. And now, I think we all know from things in the news over the last few years, now we know that the government really has been seriously investigating UFOs or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and they've been doing it behind the scenes, and basically they weren't truthful or transparent with the public because frankly we're going into this attitude of we don't really think that the nations of the planet know all the answers. who's going to come out and say, well, folks, we're here to make an announcement, and based on many years of investigation and experiences and close encounters, we're here to tell you that we know that now Earth is being visited by something, but we don't think that there's any problem. You don't want to panic. We want you to go about your daily business, go about your normal lives, if that's possible, and we'll keep you up to date on what we come up with. Oh, and please, even though many commercial airlines, many of their pilots have had lots of close encounters with strange objects in the sky, well, folks, we don't want you to stop flying the friendly skies. So there's so many different aspects of this, Richard. Like just how friendly are these guys?
One of the things that I talk about with my guests is, when we talk about the possibility that we may be being visited by others, is the possibility, and we may have even discussed this a couple of years ago, but the possibility that we're being, we're the object of interest of many different civilizations that are on many different levels of technology. That we
Yes.
may not necessarily be dealing with one particular group from one particular place. We may be dealing with all kinds of different groups from all kinds of different places. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how I feel about that. I am thrilled that you said that. And let me ask you, where did you personally come up with this speculation or this idea that you just told me?
Well, I think it's just formulated over a lifetime of studying the phenomenon. I
Okay.
started off with the idea that, back when I was just a kid, thinking, well, we're being visited by aliens, and so they come from this planet and they get in their little spaceships and they come here. But now, at 60 years old, my conclusions are completely different. I don't know that I've really reached any conclusions after this period of time, except that it's sort of developed over a period of time. Well, if they're coming from one place, why can't they be coming from another? And why should they be on similar levels of technology? Why wouldn't one
Right.
civilization be much more advanced than the other? And why would we should think that we are the end all be all in the universe when that's just not the case? It seems to me that we're just, we're sort of on the edge of I guess we're in a little tidal pool, and there's a big, vast ocean out there that we're completely unaware of, and we're in our little tidal pool thinking that we're the biggest fish in the ocean, when out there, you've got sharks and whales and all sorts of things that we've never seen before, and so I think we've got a big lesson to learn, I suppose.
Astronomers are telling us every day that the numbers are staggering of not only how many galaxies that we are now speculating or aware of out there, into the billions, possibly trillions of galaxies in the physical universe. And that you take those numbers and you take, let's say, an individual galaxy that may have on average several billion suns or stars, and astronomers are telling us now that perhaps a majority of those suns, when you go out at night and you look up at the sky at night, and if you're in a place where there's not any light pollution to kind of hide what's up there, all the stars that you can see at night, many of them, possibly most of them, have at least one planet in orbit around them. We know this already.
Mm-hmm.
I just looked this up the other day. We now know, we have confirmed, science has confirmed so far to date, just over 4,200 planets, exoplanets out there. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of this whole exoplanet, exobiology topic. And so we can't possibly be at a point historically where we still think we're the only ones out there, that have any kind of sentient. We're not the only sentient beings around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to the point that you said before, back in 1978, I spent that year working on a United Nations presentation on UFOs. And putting that all together was incredible to do. And I had speakers lined up, which included Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who used to be the science advisor to the Air Force Project Blue Book, Dr. Jacques Vallée, who was portrayed by Francois Truffaut in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, astronaut Gordon Cooper, and many people like that who were part of my United Nations presentation. So one day, I was at Dr. Hynek's home in Evanston, Illinois, where he was the director of the Dearborn Observatory there, and he was like the main astronomer there and professor. And we were sitting in his office, and I said to him, you know, Alan, we've collected a lot of interesting documents going back to the 40s that have now been declassified that really indicate on some level UFOs, many UFOs are real. But I'm not feeling like we have a smoking gun. I have to realize, I do realize, with all the years that you spent as the scientific advisor for the Air Force, you had a secret clearance. And I got to figure that you had access to some of their filing cabinets. Did you ever come across anything that you would consider, or that I would consider, a smoking gun? And he walked over to his filing cabinet, one of them, pulled out the drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and as he walked back toward me, he said, I don't know if you would consider this a smoking gun, but if you like what's in here, I'll give you permission, and you can make a few copies, and we can distribute it at the United Nations later this year. In our presentation, we'll distribute it to all the nations and all the media that shows up. Well, he had my attention at that point, so I opened up the manila envelope and I pulled out these sheets, and I started reading, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. He gave me a chapter of an official Air Force textbook, science textbook, that was only given to cadets, eyes only for Air Force Academy cadets. The science book was called Introductory Space Science. The chapter that he had given me was called Chapter 33, Unidentified Flying Objects. And I'm sitting there and I'm reading, and this chapter was prepared by Air Force officers. And from the beginning to the end, they basically are telling their cadets, here are all the current theories of UFOs. And we're going to take them one at a time, get rid of certain ideas. So they go like A, B, C, D, E, misidentifications of astronomical things, hallucinations, the planet Venus, weather anomalies, that could account for many UFO sightings. They got all the way down to the list, and the final item was alien visitors. And once they got rid of all the first batch of things to tell the cadets, this is what maybe most UFOs are. But now we're left with the possibility with item E of alien visitors to our planet. And there's some evidence to that. And then they go on and they give stories going back 50,000 years of human interactions with beings that came from the skies, as written in ancient texts. And they outline for their cadets all of these stories, and they bring it all up to date. And at one point in the middle of this, they say, we're left with the unpleasant possibility of extraterrestrials visiting Earth, possibly 3 or 4 different groups of aliens at different stages of development. And you see what you just said a few minutes ago about being from different places at different times of technology. Well, I'm reading this stuff, and I'm paraphrasing from the actual document. It said, why no contact? Well, when you go to a zoo, here's an example. When you go to a zoo, you don't go there to contact the lizards. Right. so we may appear like lizards, on the level of lizards, to someone who's much further advanced on other levels than we are, technologically, psychologically.
I like the analogy. I've heard this before, and maybe it's Richard Dolan, I can't remember, but it's the analogy where you go to a group of guerrillas in the jungle, and you say, we'd like to establish diplomatic relations with your tribe. So it's sort of the same thing, you know.
Yeah. And so I'm reading all of these books, all of these passages, and in fact the only scientist who they actually quote in this chapter and refer to him in the appendix or the references where they suggest that for further reading, all of you Air Force cadets, for further reading, we recommend the following books by astrophysicist Jacques Vallée. Now, this was 1968, Richard, that this was a chapter in 68. It wasn't until about a year ago when I sent this chapter to Jacques, because Jacques and I are friends. He was one of my principal speakers at the UN. He had no idea that he was part of this chapter. And he was amazed at that they were picking him out of all the possible people to basically let the cadets know, you want to read more of Jacques Vallée's stuff. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, holy shit, holy. And I said, Alan, with all due respect, yes, I'm very impressed by this. Are you sure? No, I said, where did you get this and how did you get this? He said, well, you don't need to know that. I'm just telling you that I have it in my files. And so this was 1978 that he gave me this document. That was 10 years after the actual chapter appeared in that science book. And in 1969, as we all know, the Air Force finished with Project Blue Book, claiming that after so many years of looking into more than 12,000 UFO reports, we've come away with the following conclusion, that there's nothing of any scientific importance about UFOs that we care to put any more effort into. We don't see any possible potentially threatening to our national security, and we don't see any evidence that any UFOs of any type could represent intelligent extraterrestrial vehicles. So forget it all, folks. Go about your lives. Project Blue Book is over. Well, now we know, all these decades later, that the government kind of lied to us. They continued investigating UFOs. They still do it, and now they've been open about it.
Yeah.
So, like, where do we go with that?
The question I have, Lee, is why would they do that? Now I know that seems like a really ridiculous question. Why would they do it? I think that the obvious answer is, well, they wouldn't want us to panic. But is that really the answer?
They did many studies in the 50s and 60s using think tanks like the Battelle Institute and the Rand Corporation, I think, did a famous study. And they were concerned. They focused on, let's get some experts, let's get some psychologists and psychiatrists to kind of figure out if it was to be revealed to the public that UFOs represented some other technology or visitors from somewhere else, how do we think the public would react? And so based on our findings, maybe it's better that we not release this information now and just kind of shrug it under the carpet and just let it go away. Mm-hmm. And they did that for a long time, but now the whole climate has been changing ever since the New York Times story in 2017 about the Pentagon and the Department of Defense's ATIP program, the 3 videos that everybody has now seen on TV, the Tic Tac video taken by jet fighter pilots. I mean, now we've seen these things, and the Navy has basically said those videos that we've already shown you do represent something that's unidentified. We don't know what these things are. We don't know where they come from, and we're still investigating it.
I think haven't they even gone so far as to say that to admit that they may have pieces of something from somewhere else? They've gone that far too, haven't they?
Well, they're being very careful about that, and that was part of the original New York Times piece from 2017. That there's always been speculation about metallic pieces and
materials.
Yeah, and exotic materials, and so, or what do they call them? Meta materials. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to give anything away, but it's a little bit of a teaser to people who are interested in our movie, The Phenomenon, we have an entire segment devoted to scientists who are doing really serious research into some of the pieces. In fact, we show the pieces on camera, and I was there. It was done in a secret Silicon Valley laboratory, and I was there to film the actual machine. James Fox was there with all of his equipment, and they allowed us into the laboratory to film. I won't even tell you what it looks like. I'd rather wait until the movie comes out. Okay. But they're using this thing to take pictures of all the way down to the molecular level, taking pictures of individual atoms and molecules, and then analyzing these things to see how this differs from how many elements that we know. And so far, their research is saying they're comparing with, we have 80 or 81 elements that we work with. Their analysis is showing that wherever this metal came from, it involves like 253 different isotopes. Whoa. And we don't know where this comes from, but they want to know. And we're not speculating on anything like extraterrestrial. It's just that there is material. And listen, I was honored to be there that day in the laboratory because they let me hold some of the pieces. Wow. and
that's got to be the coming true of the dream of a lifetime. In your, especially having done the things that you've done, all the way from the United Nations, knowing Dr. Hynek, what would Dr. Hynek have given to hold a piece of something that could very well have come from another planet in his hand?
Richard, I'm not going to even consider that he didn't do that. Okay, he was the scientific advisor. He had top secret clearance working for the Air Force. It could very well be that he was given this kind of information and that he was actually able to hold these pieces. I don't have any kind of a secret clearance. And who the hell did I think I was, holding up a vial with 9 to 10 different pieces inside it, each one clearly marked from which country it came from. Wow. I mean, this is serious stuff.
Yeah. Well, we had a conversation with Lou Elizondo about that, about the rarity of those pieces, how difficult they are to come by. And what he explained to us was that based upon their research, it appears that one of the reasons that the pieces are so difficult to come by is based upon the drive system of the crafts themselves. They use a common power propulsion system, and it's basically a field system. And when that field collapses in a violent way, it actually results in the destruction of the entire craft all the way down to the molecular level, apparently, so that what's left is, tiny little pieces of these things. And I don't know how, these particular pieces look like, but that was what they were saying, was that one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of pieces is because they're essentially destroyed in the process of the propulsion field collapsing.
Yeah, years ago, I believe it was 1988 or 89, I want to say, something came out of the sky over Russia, landed in a rural area against a mountain, and scientists went right into the area very quickly to investigate, see what, if anything, they could still find from the crash. They determined at first it was probably not just an asteroid or a small asteroid or a large meteor, because they found these very strange pieces of things that they couldn't understand what these things were. Little, almost fused, little tiny, teeny circular beads of material.
I remember that.
Lots of these things. I wrote a story about this for the Huffington Post because on the day that I went to the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, where they were opening an exhibit called Area 51 Myth or Reality. And it was a walkthrough exhibit where in different areas of the exhibit, people could see almost the history of UFOs and things related to UFOs. And in the middle of this exhibit, Richard, there was a glass, I guess I'll call it a tower, just sitting there on the floor. It came up to about maybe 4 or 5 feet high, and it had like almost a pyramid-shaped top to it, but it was completely made out of glass or some kind of high plastic. And you could see they had test tubes in the top of this display, and you could see these beads. They had the beads. Now, where did they get these beads? Well, I'll tell you. When I arrived at the museum that afternoon, in the main lobby, this was the first time that I got to meet George Knapp from KLAS-TV in Las Vegas. George Knapp is the man who pretty much single-handedly put the phrase Area 51 into the consciousness of the world with all of his reporting on this back in 1989. George Knapp was probably the only American journalist, because of his reputation. He was invited to Russia to go. He thought he was going to die there with a helicopter ride he had to take just to get to the area where that thing had crashed into the mountain. But he made it. He made it out alive. And the scientists there trusted him, and they gave him a lot of material to bring back to the United States for analysis. And on the day that George and I met, he was holding a cardboard box, and he was giving some of the material to the museum to put into this display. Wow. So they spent the rest of the afternoon putting the display together. And
was it just the beads? Just these?
Yeah, I think, if I recall, in the display it was just the beads, but then they had some pictures on cards of diagrams of the area. And they had an explanation card of what some scientists had determined so far. These beads were like impervious to heat. Some of them even displayed some sort of anti-gravity properties. But the thing that really caught my attention, Richard, underneath the top of this display, they had a sign. And the sign simply said, "Authentic Alien Artifact." I went, well, wait a minute. Wait, how can they say?
You gotta be kidding me.
No, and the thing you got to understand is the National Atomic Testing Museum is one of a handful of national museums. You cannot call yourself a national museum unless the President of the United States issues a proclamation that you're a national museum. But this one in Las Vegas, not only was it a national museum, but it's affiliated with the Smithsonian in Washington. And they've got a thing on display that says "Authentic Alien Artifact." I went, wait a minute, something's not right here. How can they say that? You know? And I was standing there. I was getting a tour of the exhibit before it opened to the press later that day. Who was giving me the tour was Alan Palmer, who was the CEO and director of the museum. Before he became the CEO and director, he had the distinction and career of being one of the very few jet fighter pilots who flew in missions for both the Air Force and the Navy. This guy had an amazing background in the military. He was now running this museum. And we became friends. I interviewed him for that story. I had him on my radio show. And so he's standing there. And I said, how can you say "authentic alien artifact"? He said, well, based on what we know so far, we have faith in George Knapp and in the scientists. And so we have things that are still being analyzed. And I said, I'm writing my story today, and I've got to send it to New York to HuffPost. Can I take a couple of pictures of the display, including the sign? And he said, I think that'll be okay. So I took a lens cap off my camera, and I'm holding it up and I'm focusing it. And all of a sudden, the woman who was the museum curator came running up to me saying, no pictures, you can't take any pictures. I said, why? She said, well, because you just can't. It's not allowed. And I said, you've got this on display here. The press is going to be here tonight. Then it opens to the public. Why can't I take pictures? I'm here with the press. Well, it's just not right. We can't just like give you an exclusive, so you can't take any pictures. Nope, no pictures. And I said, oh, okay. And she ran off, and I looked up at Alan Palmer and I said, really? And he said to me, look, Lee, she works for me. Take your pictures. And I did. And later that night, my story was on the front of the Huffington Post, and including a close-up of the display and the sign that said "Authentic Alien Artifact."
Oh
Like,
my
oh my
gosh.
God, what have I done, right?
So what was the result of that? Any repercussions? I mean, obviously there were a lot of questions. I'm assuming
the
that came
the
up.
One of the repercussions was every time that Alan wanted to do some kind of a special program, like a lecture series, they had a big room where they were bringing people, speakers, to talk about things. The museum itself is a beautiful, like it's an homage to the Cold War. And they have an incredible array of things going back into the 40s and 50s in the history, including things that have been developed at Area 51. Um, and so, and they're part of the Smithsonian. They're affiliated with the Smithsonian. But every time Alan wanted to do something like that, put on something like this exhibit, or have UFO people coming in, he had me out there one day to do a lecture at the museum. He did a whole panel where he brought in people he knew, workers from Area 51. And they came and they sat on a panel. We're talking about some of the things that they had been working on. And these were people who couldn't even tell their families what they were working on every day at Area 51 when they were flown there by special aircraft that left McCarran Air Base in the
Janet
morning.
Airlines.
Janet Airlines, you got it. Yeah. It's, unmarked airlines, white fuselage. I think there were 737s with just like some red markings on them.
Yeah.
But they parked them all at one end of the airport there. And whenever Alan wanted to do something at the museum about UFOs, he would hear from the Smithsonian, and they would come down pretty hard on him. On one occasion that I went there to cover, he had a whole panel of former military dignitaries to talk about the UFO field from going back to Project Blue Book. And he had some great people there. The former director of Project Blue Book. I mean, these were people who were really serious people in the UFOs and in the military. And there was a podium that each of them had to come to and talk to the audience that was there. And normally in the front of the podium, there was like a sign or a plaque that said National Atomic Testing Museum, a Smithsonian affiliate. For that particular occasion, the Smithsonian asked Alan Palmer to either take that plaque down or cover it up somehow, so that any pictures that would be taken or films, no one would see automatically that it was part of the Smithsonian. Like, wow. Wow. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Like,
The
what is
Smithsonian.
everybody afraid of out there?
The Smithsonian fascinates me, and I've always wondered what they have there that they don't show to people.
Yeah.
Do you have any knowledge about that?
No, I don't. I don't. And I don't even know, Richard, if the Smithsonian would be the kind of place or institution where UFO related things would be stored. I think that there are other places that are more military related than the Smithsonian.
And more conducive to keeping that kind of stuff. I was thinking more along the lines of anthropological data and specimens. We've always heard rumors about giants, and then we hear that maybe there might be some extraterrestrials that are human-like that are exceedingly tall. Things of that nature, and I was just wondering if you had any idea if they had any things like that.
No, I've never heard that kind of idea or rumor, but it wouldn't surprise me that there is that kind of material somewhere. And there are people, there are some people who've voiced the opinion that if there's any place in America where aliens can be just walking freely along the streets, well, probably one of two places, but one certainly would be Times Square in New York,
Yeah.
but maybe even more likely would be the famous Las Vegas Strip.
Yeah. I think I may have run into a few folks from somewhere else on the strip, that's for sure.
Well, you see, that's what I mean.
Well, and that leads me to something else. It goes back to a little bit earlier in our conversation.
Yeah.
I want to toss this out to you. You remember Dr. Greer's 6-inch humanoid, right? And do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I actually did 3 or 4 stories about that. The little guy called Atacama.
Yeah, the Atacama humanoid.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you what. This is what my question is. What do you think about the possibility? And I think this relates somewhat, perhaps, to panspermia, or some permutation thereof. But what do you think about the possibility that we're genetically related to everything in the universe? There's always been this idea that DNA itself developed here on planet Earth, and that everything evolved as the result of the development of DNA on our planet. But now we're starting to find that DNA is actually coming to us on comets. And
yes.
So is it possible then that we could be genetically related to everything, and that perhaps may explain the similarity, at least on some level, of the genome of the Atacama humanoid, that maybe it wasn't from here actually, but we may just be genetically related to it somehow.
As I understand it, that little 6-inch figure, it was determined after extensive analysis, was more human, had more human aspects to it than non-human.
Yeah.
Now that said, to your point, I'm one of those who have no problem believing that we were seeded here by someone, by something at some far distant time in the past. I don't believe in accidents. I don't necessarily believe in the concept of evolution. And I know we're going to get a lot of cards and letters. What? He doesn't believe in evolution. Well, I always throw out, if evolution really does exist or did, and if there were apes so long ago, why are there still apes? Why didn't all of the apes evolve into where we are now?
Mm-hmm.
And it just little things like that. And again, just reading the information from this chapter, this Air Force chapter to the cadets back in the 1960s, where they were seriously telling the young students there that there's evidence that Earth has been visited by someone, that there have been interactions. And I don't get religious at all or often, but the Bible is filled with references of visitation from somewhere to the inhabitants of planet Earth. There are all kinds of references that things came out of the sky and had something to do with the people leaving Egypt, following Moses, or things involving Jesus. And the people are saying Jesus was either the Son of God or he came from another planet. I mean, your head can explode with all the theories that go around.
Well, you can certainly envision ancient peoples being confronted with someone who appeared to descend from the sky, and envisioning those people as gods.
Yes.
I don't think that would necessarily. Well, I don't know. I guess it could happen today. All depending on where something would land, I suppose. But I wanted to ask you something and get back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier, but I wanted to expound on a little bit. I wanted to ask you about Dr. Carol Rosin, and you recall that she mentioned that Werner von Braun had told her that essentially the last card that would be played by the powers that be would be the extraterrestrial card, and that is, to keep the military-industrial complex alive. And so, because once we run out of terrestrial enemies, then we have to start looking to extraterrestrial enemies. And so I'm curious how you feel about that within the context of what's been happening with what came out of ATIP and OSAP
Right.
and the current To the Stars Academy. And I just want to kind of put in there, too, that I see that the word threat comes up a lot. And so my question to you is, do you think that what is happening now is part of that scenario, that we're being told that there are extraterrestrials, but it's being presented to us in such a way that we could consider that they are a threat, and that will allow us to be more supportive of the continuation of the military-industrial complex?
Which is what President Eisenhower warned everybody about.
Mm-hmm.
During his final speech to the public, he told everybody to beware of the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. He knew back then that the military isn't always to be trusted.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible that that's what's happening right now, that we're being told this, that they're being allowed to tell us this, but only within the context of a potential threat?
Well, it's an interesting point. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Jimmy Kimmel Live had several interesting people on his show different times. He had former President Clinton on. He had former President Bush, and then Hillary Clinton in the height of the campaign. And he got her to talk about the fact that her husband tried to find out about UFOs and to release information, but he couldn't get the information. She said, but if I'm elected your president, I will do what I can to release previously classified information to the public. And then she gave it a caveat. She said, as long as the information that I could uncover doesn't
affect
interfere
national security
or affect national security. Yeah, you're right. And I was sitting at home watching that, and I thought, well, right there you go. I mean,
yeah,
she knew that, and even President Trump did a similar thing back in June when he was interviewed for Father's Day by his son. He said the same kind of thing, but Hillary said back in 2016 that she said, I'm aware that there are millions of people out there that want to know more about this information. They deserve to know. But what she was really saying is, I'm aware that there are millions of registered voters out there who are also very interested in this topic. And if I, as a candidate, get elected and they hear me say that when you make me president, I'm going to release information, well, I'll get their votes. Mm-hmm. She knew this. She had to be advised about things like this.
With no intention of releasing the information.
That's right.
It has to relate to national security.
There's
no way around it.
My attitude is I maintain that everything, especially the stuff that we've been seeing in the news just over the last few years, everything that's related to UFOs or UAPs, everything has something to do with a potential threat to our national security. Because these objects are flying around in our skies over all the countries of the world with impunity. They can go wherever they want, wherever they want, and they can either cloak themselves, or if they're in the mood to show themselves, they can just turn on a light switch inside their ship and they can get lit up. Because why do they want to be seen? If they didn't want to be seen, they wouldn't be lit up. So they can go wherever they want. And too many cases, all of the nations of the world that have air technology or air military forces, they've all run into the same problems. They've been scrambled to go up and chase these things. They can't get close enough to them. And in some cases, their instrument panels were suddenly turned off by these lights that came close to them. And the objects could do circles around their aircraft. demonstrating that we can do stuff better than you can do it. So don't screw around with us. Mm-hmm. And we've always had this situation. And what leader of any nation is going to want to go to the public and say, well, folks, I'm here to tell you that, yes, we do acknowledge that there's something going on in the skies above our country or above our planet, but we don't believe that there's any aggression that's associated with that. And so we don't think that there's any threat to our national security. We'll keep you informed as we feel more information comes through, but please go about your daily lives and don't worry about it. Like,
yeah.
What?
Sure. Well, and I think from a national security perspective as well, Lee, I think that, if you are in charge of national security and you have sworn an oath to protect, the Constitution and protect the country, you can't assume that these objects are being controlled by benign individuals. You sort of have to assume that they're a threat until you learn otherwise. Isn't that sort of the case?
Yeah. When the whole Tic Tac UFO thing broke in the New York Times a few years ago, the main investigation, or so they said to the public, was we're trying to determine if any of these objects could be the product of an advanced technology on our own planet. We want to know, is this Russian technology? Is this Chinese? Is it someone else? Because it could affect our national security. Well, we now pretty much know nobody's got this technology. Nobody. And so that increases the problem of the governments trying to be transparent. They can't be transparent. And I've been saying for years, Richard, that I don't really think there's going to be ultimate disclosure about this in my lifetime. Yeah. I think we have a ways to go before whoever the visitors are feel comfortable enough to invite us to join their federation.
Well, and wouldn't you agree that as between the two, that is us and them, whoever them or they are, that it's they who control the secrecy, not us. Yeah, well, and if they really wanted the whole planet to know that we were being visited from somewhere else, then they really could simply do something with impunity, land on the White House lawn, or whatever they were going to do to announce their presence, and there wouldn't be anything we could do about it. So clearly, they're the ones that have made the decision not to make open contact.
I believe that. It's like straight out of, and I don't want to say this thinking that there'll be an invasion, but straight out of Independence Day. All of a sudden, these ships just started appearing over all the major cities. And that's happened in other movies, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, just other movies where there's some potential invasion. War of the Worlds. All of a sudden, the Martian machines just start showing up over all the major cities. It can unravel everything that's going on this planet. Here's another question that I like to tell people or pose to people. How many people out there do you think realize that the Vatican has two, it's like two breath mints in one, not just one. They have two astronomical observatories that they use, one in Rome near the Vatican, and the other one, I believe, on a mountaintop, I believe in Arizona, where they're studying the heavens, and they have actual astronomers, Vatican astronomers, and I've often said, what are they looking for? Why are they looking for how the planets change positions, how the moons of Jupiter keep changing their positions every night? I mean, why is the Vatican so interested in spending time looking to the heavens? What do they know, or what do they suspect that they're not telling us?
Well, didn't we get somewhat of a hint a few years ago? And I remember there was a lot of talk about this when there was I don't think it was the Pope, but a cardinal that came out and said that if we did happen to find people from outer space, that they would just be our brothers and sisters.
Yes, and also the Pope was asked during or after one of his services how he felt about would he ever consider baptizing an extraterrestrial or someone like that? And he made a statement. He said, if a Martian were to come in and ask to be baptized, who am I to say no? You know, and you know that made headlines around the world.
Yeah. What I'm curious about, Lee, is you've been really doing this from I guess the beginning of the interest in the UFO phenomenon for a really long time. I looked at that photograph of you sitting at the table preparing for the United Nations presentation
Yeah.
with Gordon Cooper, and I'm curious as to what you think now after all this time. I mean, I hate to ask you, well, what conclusions have you drawn? Because that's just such a that's not a great question. But what have you learned? Because I guess conclusions might be difficult to come by. But what have you learned what do you know now that you didn't know now back in the '70s when you were doing this?
Well, back in the '70s, and this was a couple of years after I did my first project in the whole UFO field. I did you remember vinyl recordings, vinyl records,
Oh
Richard?
yeah, yeah. I had a great record
Well,
collection.
I did a vinyl documentary, spoken word record called UFOs: The Credibility Factor, and
Yes.
I did this for CBS in 1975, and that set me on the trail of everything that happened after that. And and when I was done with that, and the record was doing well, I was feeling like this something more that I can do with this subject, and I wanted to reach a bigger audience. And so I started talking to people, saying, "Do you think I could somehow do anything at the United Nations? Because well, why not? The United Nations, for whatever, for people who say the UN is not as effective as it used to be, it is still the United Nations. So that would be the place that would get a lot of attention if they were to somehow do something about UFOs." And people said to me, you can't just go up to the United Nations and knock on the door and say, "Hello, my name is Lee Speigel. I'm a journalist, and I'd like to come in and talk to someone about my producing a UFO presentation here." Well, how fast would I either be kicked out or arrested if I were to do anything like that?
Sure.
So I was a little discouraged until 1977, when I started seeing and reading about and hearing on TV that the Prime Minister of Grenada, Eric Gary, was now making speeches at the United Nations about how his little Caribbean country, uh, he wanted it to be the focal point for UFO investigations. He had had some sightings of something himself, and he wanted to make the United Nations aware of these things so that they could use his country as a place to form a committee and just do investigations on UFOs. I kept, every time I saw him on TV making these speeches, I thought, nobody's paying any attention to this guy because they don't have to, because no other big country is doing anything about it. So I thought, listen, he's the only game in town. I need to get through to the Prime Minister of Grenada. so uh,
That's
so
what
I
you
got
did.
friendly, and I did. I contacted the Grenada embassy, or the mission in New York City, right near the United Nations, and it started with phone conversations, and I got friendly with his ambassadors, and they invited me to come to their office and to sit down and have coffee with them. And I told them that my idea is I would like to produce something at the United Nations. It's never been done before in history, and your prime minister is not getting anywhere with this. So would you please take this record album that I did a couple of years ago, and please give this to your prime minister with my appreciation as a gift. And I would love to hear from him, to let him know that if he's still serious about doing something at the UN, we may need each other and we can work with each other, because I've got the people who will come to the UN that I can put together, and he doesn't have any of these people. So I waited and I waited. A couple of weeks went by, and the ambassadors called me and said, "Well, our prime minister is going to be in New York shortly. He's being knighted, Sir Eric Gary. A big ceremony, and we would like to invite you to the ceremony." and he would like to meet with you after. And I said, yes, yes, we're going to do this. And really, I went to the UN, saw the whole pomp and circumstance thing, dignitaries from all the major countries. And when it was all over, the ambassadors brought me into a private room at the UN, and Sir Eric Gary walked in, and they introduced me, and then they left the two of us alone. And he said he really enjoyed my record album, and what did I have in mind? And I said to him, well, Mr. Prime Minister, congratulations, by the way, on being knighted today. I mean, I'll never have that. And I said, look, you've been trying to get the United Nations to pay attention to your crusade, and nobody's paying attention to you. Again, no offense, but I have the people behind me who I can gather them together who would make a difference and the UN would listen to. And over a handshake, we made a deal, right then and there. And what happened shortly after that, they issued a letter to all the nations of the world that there's going to be an upcoming UFO presentation later in the year when the General Assembly was back in session, and that I had the full filming rights to it, and I was going to be presenting some of the people who would make a big deal and have an impact at the UN. And then two other things happened that are just so great. They sent me in the mail like a delegate's card. Uh-huh. It was like a little larger than a credit card. It was a yellow color, had the logo of the United Nations, and it said delegate card, Lee Speigel representing Grenada. And friends of mine said, oh, you've done it now. Our country is never going to let this go. I mean, you're basically siding with another country against our own country. And I said, well, what am I going to do? But that card got me into the United Nations whenever I needed to go there for meetings and to just go around there. I didn't have to knock on the door. It let me in. And then I started getting, and this was another thing that people were concerned about, I started getting checks from the United National Bank of Grenada because they were paying for my expenses to work on this presentation throughout 1978. So if I had to do any traveling to go and get documents or just to see people, Grenada paid for it. And I had these checks, and people were saying to me, no, you can't take money from Grenada.
Why not?
What are you doing? So it was like one thing after another, but hey, we did the presentation, we pulled it off, and Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée and Stan Friedman were spectacular.
And then they invaded Grenada.
Well, we did the presentation. Thank you for saying that. We did the presentation in November of 1978. Shortly after that, there was a political coup, takeover in Grenada, and Sir Eric Gary was overthrown. Okay, so he was suddenly no longer the leader. And I don't remember how long it was before I heard. I was at home watching the ABC Nightly News, and Peter Jennings was reporting that earlier today, the President Reagan, blah, 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 we've just sent troops into Grenada, and then we invaded Grenada. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, this must be my fault. That's all I could think of.
You did it.
Where am I going to hide now? Are you kidding? And we invaded Grenada. I mean, it was like one thing after another after another.
Do you think they were related now after so much time, or is what was invaded, the invasion of Grenada and the UFO issue was just more or less some icing on the cake?
Good question. I don't know. 30 years later, when I was working at the Huffington Post, and periodically, like once a year, the United Kingdom would release batches of previously classified government documents from the Ministry of Defense, and it was always a big deal. They would allow the press to get these documents and to see what had been written about it. And my editor, Buck Wolf, came to me and said, "Were you planning on doing a story about the new documents from the UK. And I said, well, I might do something small. And he said, well, go ahead and do it. And, we'll punch it up in HuffPost. And I started reading through the documents until I came to some documents that were dated 1977, 1978, that apparently, and I didn't know this, the UK tried to stop my presentation at the UN like how many decades prior to releasing these documents. And it took like 30 or 40 years before the documents were released. And I'm reading these things, and they were saying that the UK, the Parliament, the Ministry of Defense doesn't think that doing anything about UFOs would help the credibility of the United Nations. And so we'll do whatever we can behind the scenes to stop it. And I didn't know this was going on in 1978. Nobody had told me about this. And so I went back to my editor and I said, listen, this is now personal. Looking at these documents, they tried to stop my presentation in 1978. I would like to write this story, but in the first person. Mm-hmm. And he said, go for it. Wow. And so I did. Now, have you done on your show? Have you had Nick Pope? I'm sure you probably have.
No, I haven't had Nick yet. But I want to get him.
Nick Pope, between 1991 and 1993, he ran the UFO office at the Ministry of Defense. Yep. So he was the go-to guy in the early 1990s. And so he was always the first person to get new documents that were coming out later on when I was getting these documents for the Huffington Post story. And so I decided to call him and to do an interview with him just to get his take on these documents. And so I rung him up. He answered the phone, and I said, "Hey, Nick, it's Lee." And he went, "Oh, I know why you're calling. I know why you're calling." And I have to tell you, I had nothing to do with this thing in 1978. I was 13 years old. I hadn't even started working at the Ministry of Defense, so you can't blame me for that.
So he knew, and he knew one day he'd get a call from you.
Yeah. It's like so many different things, all these personalities, all this talk. It's like, but it's made me realize that the whole idea of disclosure or open what's the word? I just had it a moment ago.
Transparency.
Transparency, yes. It's still not happening. Little by little, they're showing us a few videos here and there. There are supposed to be more videos coming out. You will see some things in the phenomenon that you haven't seen before that we hope will make a difference in what people believe or not believe about UFOs. I mean, I will tell you this. Have you done any shows about a place in Utah called the Skinwalker Ranch?
I haven't done any shows about it, but I have to tell you that the Skinwalker Ranch is about 100 miles southwest of me. It's very close to where I live, and I'm very familiar with the area. It's near a town called Vernal, Utah. And,
okay.
I'm very familiar with the area and certainly with the folklore surrounding, that.
Yeah, the History Channel did their first season a few months ago of the secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch. Mm-hmm. And when James Fox and I were sitting across from Senator Harry Reid, who instigated the whole process of getting all the money to give to the Department of Defense and the Pentagon to develop this ATIP thing to study UFOs. And he was the Senate Majority Leader. He was the most powerful man in the Senate. And we're sitting talking to him about his role in getting UFO information out to the public. And he said, and this is not included in the phenomenon. We decided better left leaving it on the cutting room floor for now. Mm-hmm. But he said, and we didn't even ask him about this. We had no intention of asking him this, but he just said, he paused and he took a drink of water and he said, there's a place in Utah, there's a ranch. And as soon as he said that, I knew what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have to say the name of the ranch. He said, there's a ranch in Utah where just about every paranormal type of activity that you can imagine has taken place. And there are other places like this around the world. And these kinds of things must be studied by science. And I looked at James Fox and I said, yeah, this is maybe for another interview. But, you hear stuff like that and it makes you believe even more that there's stuff going on around us that we're not being told. And I'm not even saying that I think it's a bad thing that we're not being told a lot of the facts, because part of me thinks that it's maybe a good thing that maybe we should not be told. Maybe we're not aware enough, conscious enough, mature enough as a species to learn what some of the truths are about this. I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I really am. And so
I am too. I am too.
Yeah.
I think we kind of have to be, because, we either have to be comfortable with it or squirm around and be uncomfortable with it, but the result is the same. We're not going to learn all the truths until something happens. And I think it has to do with the evolution and development of our culture and our society.
Yeah.
And I think that we will have to get to the point where we really do start to love the other person more than we love ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to get our stuff together down here. We have to show our visitors that we're worthy of getting an invitation to join them, whatever that may mean. Mm-hmm. No, really, we have to. There's so much. I mean, President Trump's whole United States Space Force that people are talking about, and claiming that we're going to have the best weapons in space. And well, okay, but really, shouldn't those weapons, instead of being aimed toward the Earth, shouldn't they be aimed away from the Earth, and not as a potential way of saving us from UFOs or extraterrestrials, but shouldn't this Space Force be doing whatever it can to have a program set up that can eliminate any potential threat of Earth getting hit by an asteroid, for example?
That's the big fear.
We have nothing in place that will prevent something like that.
Wouldn't you agree that really, if these extraterrestrials were wanting to destroy us, clearly they could have done so by now?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. Nobody seems to be planning an invasion, because maybe this is how they do an invasion. They take 50,000 years to decide. Yeah. Well, okay, maybe by 2021, that's when we'll hit. But I don't know if it's like that. Yeah.
Well, Lee, my plan was to let everybody see the trailer for the phenomenon. I'd like to go ahead and show everybody the trailer.
Yeah, and if they go to the site where the trailer is, it's just simply called thephenomenonfilm.com. It's all one word, thephenomenonfilm.com. They'll see a lot of good information about the film, who the people are in the movie, some great testimonials, and they'll see the trailer there. And if people want to even pre-order the movie now, you'll be able to see where you can pre-order it online. So it's a great site for people to want to get kind of on top of this even before it hits on October 6th.
I appreciate that, Lee, and I've already pre-purchased the program, so I can hardly wait for the premiere on Tuesday. I'm really looking forward, because I loved James's first two films, and I'm certain this is going to be great. I really appreciate you being here with me today, Lee.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and I hope we get a chance to talk again in the future.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon, Lee.
Okay, look forward to it.
Okay, and I'll be back in a few minutes with some afterthoughts.
There are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms.
That have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
When we got right up to it, it lit up.
Was this a warning? Was this an attempt to communicate?
Felt scared. I was running and playing, and then I saw this maroon color in the sky.
It was not anything from this earth.
He was looking at all of us. Maybe they're trying to communicate.
They were reaching out to us.
There is an immense array of unanswered questions and an urgent need to get to the bottom of it.
The public has a right to know.
My gosh, look at that thing.
The question is no longer if they are here, but why.
What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations?
For over 75 years, there have been sightings in the sky.
The UFO shut down several missile silos in Montana.
Thousands of witnesses worldwide.
It had to be a data collection. I'm sure they scanned the warhead.
Just kind of hovering there. It never changed its longitudinal axis. And then it goes poof, and it takes off the side.
And high-level cover-ups.
The government was covering up what happened at Roswell.
Hiding these dark secrets. I was told there wasn't anything there when I knew there was.
People need to know there is something else out there.
Yes, there had been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
Shouldn't we be spending some money to study all these phenomena?
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something.
Now it's time to tell people about it. These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
The Phenomenon premieres Tuesday, October 6th. You can pre-order the film at thephenomenonfilm.com. You can also order it on Apple TV, Prime Video, Vimeo, Vudu, and Fandango. I've pre-ordered mine already, and I am seething with anticipation. I've been thoroughly impressed by James' earlier work on the groundbreaking films Out of the Blue and I Know What I Saw. The Phenomenon promises to be the apex of this groundbreaking trilogy, which sheds the light of truth on the UFO phenomenon. Are we being visited by others from another world? Are they a threat to us? Are their intentions benign? Why don't they communicate with us, or have they? Maybe the message they're sending just isn't making it out to the public. Without journeying too far out on a limb here, I would speculate that their interest in our nuclear weapons and the facilities in which they are housed is really more one of curiosity than of genuine concern for our well-being. While I would like to believe that the Earth is being guarded by an alien uber race of benevolent space brothers, I think the more likely scenario is that if we do have alien visitors, they are probably more interested in us culturally and anthropologically than they are with assuming control of our planet. If they wanted to do that, they could have done it long before we developed nuclear weapons. It is more likely that we are a case study in civilizations on the brink of turning into a Kardashev Type 1 civilization. Will we survive the transition, or will we continue to poison ourselves, only to end it all in a nuclear conflagration? Only time will tell. Don't forget to go to thephenomenonfilm.com and pre-order your copy of James Fox's new film, The Phenomenon. Please join me next week on the official MUFON Podcast, when my guest will be Dr. Simeon Hine. We'll be talking about UFOs and remote viewing. Thank you once again for joining me on the official MUFON Podcast.